Hello everybody, Jason here from the At the Coalface podcast. I've created a new sub-series called Mentoring Moments, and Mentoring Moments is composed of clips taken from my one-on-one and group mentorship sessions where we discuss e-commerce, digital, retail, and so much more. Hopefully you get a lot out of this. Enjoy. Hey everybody, so I'm here with Ashley again on our one-to-one mentoring session, and she's got some great questions in her agenda to discuss with me today, and I wanted to share those with you because I think it'll be useful to a lot of people that are going through similar situations, similar things, and Ashley's looking at developing an additional sort of potential side project, potential side hustle, potential additional streams of income via e-commerce, by selling via e-commerce. And that's really what has prompted or driven a lot of these questions. And she's exploring what her options are, exploring how she might go to market, exploring how she might develop her product range, how she might do her channel selection, how she might do her channel development, but do it in a relatively low risk, low cost, thought out, well-planned way. So that's really where the genesis of most of these questions have come from. Is that right, Ashley?
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Yes, that is precisely it.
Cool. So one of the first questions that you had on your agenda was, for new products, how do we go about finding product market fit? So there's kind of two pieces to this, or two pieces to the answer to this. And one is, what is the existing demand, and trying to identify through keyword research, what does existing demand in the market look like? Is there existing demand? Is there existing competition for that demand? What is the level of the existing competition for that demand? And particularly when you're first starting out, and whether that's via a DTC website or whether that's via an existing marketplace, you're going to be paying, right, one way or another. So if it's a D2C website, then usually if you're a brand new startup website, then you're going to need to be driving immediate traffic some way. So that usually involves some form of Google ads, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, TikTok ads. It usually requires some form of advertising to generate the initial inbound traffic. And so you're going to be paying for those ads. And in many cases, that is now unsustainable for startup brands because the cost for that is so high. The other way is to leverage platforms that already have existing traffic. So the likes of Etsy, the likes of eBay, Amazon, etc., marketplaces. But then you have the added complexity of, okay, now how do I get my products into those platforms? How do I manage sales through those platforms? How do I manage fulfillment through those platforms in a way that doesn't chew up so much of my time that I can't actually easily fulfill products, that I can't automate or streamline the process to make it efficient enough to where when I'm still doing relatively small numbers, it's not absorbing all of my time. So that's really and you're still going to pay, right? You're going to pay a success fee. You're going to usually pay a listing fee. You're going to usually pay ad fees on those platforms if you're running ads on those platforms. So they're not without cost in their own, but they do have the benefit of being able to allow you to quite easily and quickly test the waters of demand because they've already got the traffic, right? So oftentimes selling via a marketplace can be a very quick route to market validation, product market fit validation, and to assess the overall level of existing demand. Beyond capturing demand, we then have creating demand. How do we create demand for our products? And that's usually via organic content, right? That is almost all via social media. That's almost always the way we will go about creating demand for our products, our services, us as a personal brand. However we're going to do that, it's usually via content, right? And the only place really nowadays from a social media perspective where you can get some decent traction for free is on TikTok, because almost all of the other platforms are now 0.5%, 1%, 2% organic reach. And as a result of that, you cannot rely on other social media platforms for a lot of organic traffic and the ability to create content that is engaging, that is interesting, that can create demand where there might not already be demand. And really what we can think of demand as desire, right? It's an emotional trigger. And so if I oftentimes like to substitute the word desire for the word demand, because demand sounds quite clinical, but if we think of it as we're trying to create desire. We're trying to create desire for a product or a service, and that's the emotional connection that we're trying to create. And so trying to do that organically, it can be very tough. And nowadays, I think that it's the halo brands of influencers, it's the halo brands of people that have managed to build a community before they ever try to monetize that community that are seeing high levels of success. And so I think it is going to be harder and harder moving forward, and not to pour cold water on what you're trying to do, but it is going to become harder and harder to find niches that aren't already dominated by either very strong personalities with very strong halo brands that can go in and dominate out of the gate, and I've got tens of thousands of followers that they can monetize at will by just wearing something or just showing something or just demonstrating something, and then boom, they've got instant traffic and instant demand. Not everybody's in that position. And then we have the major retail players, which are very well entrenched in most places and in most markets and in most verticals. And so trying to compete against those entrenched players that have usually significant resources to run ads, far more frequently than you ever could, and they can outbid you. You're now in a position where, how do I get traffic organically? That's going to be difficult without a community, without an existing community. How can I get paid traffic or performance traffic? That's going to be expensive. How do I get traffic via marketplaces? That's expensive. So it all of a sudden starts to become a place where there's no such thing as a free lunch anymore on the internet. It used to be a lot easier. And so you could just put up a D2C website. Organic reach in Google was ultra high. There wasn't a tremendous amount of competition. So you could pretty easily rank well within a month, within 2 months, within 3 months. You could rank super well organically. There was huge demand online because it was the great new thing. And it was pretty easy to capture the lion's share of that demand pretty quickly. But those days we're probably 10 years past those days. And so really, I think it's about how can we find a niche that perhaps is not oversaturated? How can we test out that niche? How can we see how much demand there is through keyword research? How can we do small market tests through marketplaces? But even in marketplaces, you usually are going to want to have a D2C website first, because as a startup, you will not have, say, for example, an ERP with all of your products in it that you then can push directly to the marketplaces. You're going to want to have a D2C website with your catalog, with your images, with your product descriptions, with your product attributes, that then you can take an off-the-shelf connector, an off-the-shelf marketplace connector, whether the platform itself provides it or a third-party marketplace app that plugs into your e-commerce website that can easily push your products up to all the local marketplaces that you want to sell on, and then also pull down orders from those marketplaces into your e-commerce platform, so that then you can go through the standard order fulfillment process inside your e-commerce platform. And that's a great way to start, so that even if you don't expect that you're going to be selling a ton of product directly through your own e-commerce website, it can function as like your mini ERP. Because let's say you're running Shopify, right? There's 25 apps out there that plug into Shopify, cost you almost nothing to run those apps, and they'll push your catalog out to all the major marketplaces. They'll pull down your orders from those marketplaces into Shopify. And then Shopify, of course, has many apps that plug into local courier aggregators for fulfillment that will then pull down the tracking details into Shopify, update it to shipped, and automatically notify the customer via Shopify that the order has been shipped, automatically update the marketplace in reverse that the item has been shipped, and then trigger off the transactional emails through the marketplaces. So if you deploy a direct-to-consumer website, you're not necessarily doing that just so that you can capture a whole bunch of traffic and demand and drive direct sales. It becomes your commerce hub. It becomes the hub of everything that you do from a commerce perspective. It's where you keep your pricing. It's where you do your promotions. It's where you do all those things. And then you use that as a central hub to push your catalog out to the other channels that you want to sell through. And it just makes things a whole lot easier, because without something like that, then you need to have a platform that you can easily manage 2, 3, 4 marketplaces at a time. And there's not a lot of them out there. And you need a place to keep your catalog, basically. You need a place to process orders. You need an order management platform, and you need to be able to plug into fulfillment aggregators and shipping platforms, etc. And it's always easier to do that using an e-commerce platform that already has an ecosystem around it. And there's no other e-commerce platform other than Shopify that I'm talking about retail e-commerce now. There's no other platform that has a larger ecosystem than Shopify. So that's the reality. If you want to sell and you want to dip your toes in the water on these other channels, by being on Shopify, it will allow you to much more easily test out these other channels as a connector to Shopify. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I didn't know that Shopify could push product or vice versa to things like fulfilled by Amazon or Etsy. So that's interesting, because originally I was just going to start with Etsy because I know how to rank pretty quickly. There's a pretty cut and dry process about keywords, SEO, everything like that. So you can rank quite quickly. So I was going to start with Etsy, but then I was running into the problem of what you're talking about with generating demand or creating that organic content so people have something to go back to. And so my specialty is I'm a lifecycle marketer. So email marketing, email automation is my thing. It's my jam. So I have all these emails that are ready to go that are more engaging, value-added content. But then I was left thinking, like, how am I going to do that? I'm only on Etsy right now. Do I want to create that Shopify website? If I do, then I could use some of the content that I've created as like blog posts, and then I can integrate with an email marketing platform. But I just didn't know if it was too much to chew, if I was biting off too much, more than I can chew right off the bat without actually validating enough of the product market fit.
Yeah, look, I think that as you're going through the process of assessing product market fit and trying to feel your way through that process, Shopify's cheap. $30 a month, I think, is their cheapest plan or something like that. So it's a pretty cheap way to have a commerce hub up and running very quickly using an off-the-shelf theme, maybe with some minor tweaks, putting your logo in it. Remember, in that first phase, you're not going to be getting a truckload of traffic to this new website anyway, unless you're paying for it. So you're really just using this as a convenient tool to connect into other channels, into other digital channels, and a way to organize and structure your product data inside of a catalog engine that ultimately can push out products to the social platforms. So for example, if you want to create an ad that is connected to a product, and you want people to be able to execute directly from the ad and be able to effectively be redirected to your website and actually complete the transaction on your own website, you need a place to do that anyway. Whether you're creating an ad on Facebook, you're creating an ad on Instagram that then has to be executed transactionally somewhere, because they don't allow the transaction to complete on those platforms. They're actually scaling back their transactional capabilities on those platforms, not increasing them, at least as of now. And you still need a place for the customer to actually complete and execute the transaction. And even with a Google ad, you're usually going to redirect them to your D2C website to actually execute the transaction. And when you're trying to list on multiple marketplaces and you now are trying to test and dip your toes in the water of multiple sales channels simultaneously, having a central order management hub, having a central catalog hub, having a central pricing hub becomes even more important than just running an eBay business or just running an Etsy business. Once you get to a certain scale, and it becomes really difficult to manage those accounts 100% manually, to manually download the orders via CSV, manually upload those orders to a courier aggregator platform, and then download all the tracking details, manually push those back up to something like Etsy, push in the tracking details so you can trigger off the transactional emails through Etsy to let the customer know that you shipped the goods. Doing all that manually is, with even a handful of orders, can pretty rapidly, from an operational perspective, chew up all your time to where you don't have any time to focus on the marketing side, don't have any time to focus on the community side, don't have any time to focus on the content side. So my advice always is, you still need, even from day one, you still need a catalog hub, you still need an order management hub, you still need a way to scale from 0 to, say, 50 orders a day. And probably the cheapest, easiest, fastest way to do that is via Shopify, to be honest.
All right, now I have my next project.
Yeah, you had a very good sort of follow-up question in the same vein as this, which was, how do we go about creating revenue models for new products and or businesses? You're not going to necessarily, and every product will be slightly different, every vertical will be slightly different, but I think you've just got to work out all of your COGS, meaning what is my total cost of goods sold? So it's not just the price of buying, unless you're actually making the items. And some people that sell on Etsy are obviously craftspeople, and they literally make the items. And so there'll be the cost of goods for them is the components that they use to make the goods and what the total cost to manufacture it is. But there's other cost of goods, usually in terms of the actual distribution, actually getting it to people. Actually, there's a whole lot of other costs that go into, from your overheads to your advertising costs, cost of acquisition, the distribution costs. All those costs have to be taken into account when you're trying to work out, okay, what do I need to sell this for to actually be profitable and to actually have a scalable business? So really what we need to do is we need to think about, okay, how much profit are we expecting to make off of this? We need to try to bring into usually a spreadsheet, at least initially, because you won't have, when you first start out, you're not going to have an ERP, you're not going to have data visualization platforms, you're not going to have BI tooling, you're not going to have any of these platforms that make this process much easier once you hit a certain scale. So what you're going to do is you're going to be tracking all of this stuff generally in a spreadsheet or a Google Sheet. You're going to be tracking all of my costs associated with procuring the goods, distributing the goods, selling the goods on a specific platform, marketing the goods, obviously paying for my time for all of that process, your time in this case for the entire process, and then an adequate margin for yourself on top of that. And that's how you arrive at the pricing model for what you ultimately want to sell your goods for. At that point, that is a very good place for you to start saying, okay, is there anyone else out there selling the same goods or similar goods? What is the cost competitive nature? Do I have any pricing power in this market? Or am I basically at the mercy of the market because I am selling something that is sold by 50 other people? If not, then I've got pricing power and I can make more margin usually, because as long as there's adequate demand and not enough supply, it's all about supply and demand at the end of the day. If there's lots of supply and low or static demand, then it comes at usually down to an all-out price war. If there's low supply, high demand, then the reverse is true. And you can own a market, you can carve out a solid niche, and you have a lot more pricing power. Therefore, you can typically make a lot more margin. So there's a lot of factors that come into this, and I think we could talk a long time about this. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you just have to make sure that you are adequately tracking all of the costs, not just the physical goods themselves, but you're tracking all of the costs across the whole of the business, including your time, when you come up with your pricing model for your goods. And I see businesses quite frequently overlooking significant cost centers in their business when they start doing some of these initial calculations. They go, oh yeah, that's right, we pay for this platform. Oh, that's right, we pay for this platform. Oh, that's right, we pay for this. Oh, that's right, we have a small office. So we've got all these different costs associated with doing that. Even if they're running the business from home, they oftentimes have costs that when they start thinking it through line by line, it can add up pretty quickly. And so that would be my advice, is to really be pretty detail orientated in terms of all of the costs associated with doing business and the costs of procuring and selling those individual items as well. Just be pretty cautious and err on the little bit of the conservative side whenever you're doing your calculations around traffic, whenever you're doing your calculations around cost of acquisition, whenever you're doing your calculations on average success fee cost or listing fees on a marketplace, always err on the conservative side, because oftentimes those costs will end up being more than what you initially think they will be, at least when you're first starting out, until you reach a level of scale. There's something to be said for scaling, and there is an opportunity to oftentimes cut down your costs quite significantly as you scale. But when you first start out, it's better to err on the very, very conservative side, just so that you make sure that you cover your costs. Because I'm not one of those people that believe that businesses should typically, when they start out, to grab market share and to acquire customers, they should be subsidizing every sale. I just don't believe that, and especially in the current market. Maybe when money was cheap, and maybe when investment was cheap, and maybe when it was easy to go out there and grab $1 million drop of VC money into your business to get you up and running, maybe that was a more reasonable thing, and maybe that was a more reasonable approach. But we saw many of those D2C businesses that sprang up and got lots of investment during COVID going out of business now. So I don't think it necessarily ever made sense to sell things at a loss. If you're Adobe or you're a software supplier, then you can probably subsidize it for a period of time to get traction. When you're first small and starting out, my advice is always plan on making a profit from day one.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I guess the follow-up question to that, you always see on like Shark Tank, they're looking for a 40%, 60% margin, and the higher, the better. Is there like a minimum profit margin that you shoot for, that, hey, this is the number, if it's below that, it's not worth it?
It really comes down to you and what you're willing to stomach. When you're looking at the total volume that you can potentially sell in a given market, you have to, if the goal ultimately is to turn this maybe from an initial side hustle into a main hustle, if that's the ultimate goal, it might not be today, not be tomorrow, but it might be in 5 years' time to turn the side hustle into a main hustle, then you have to decide whether the margin that you are able to make in that market or in that vertical or in that country or on that product or product range, the aggregate. So very rarely will you be only selling one product. And so you might be selling 50 products, for example, to begin with. The margin will vary quite substantially on those, but you will have a blended margin. And if you can live with whatever blended margin you think you can make based on all the research that you're going to do, then I'd say go for it. For some people, a 10% net margin for them is good enough, because if they're doing $1 million a year and they're making a 10% net margin, that's $100,000. That replaces a pretty nice wage. So it really comes down to what you need to live, and everybody's cost of living is different. Here in New Zealand, our cost of living is ultra high. So it's like one of the highest in the world. And so if you live in another country, if you live in Mexico or Central America or South America, then your cost of living potentially will be very low. And so therefore the net margin that you need to retain might not be as high. Your cost of doing business in those countries might be mega low. So it just really, there's a lot of factors that go into what you think your margin needs to be to make it worth your time.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And
cool. And then sorry, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You had asked a question around shipping as well. So how do we, if we are going to consider drop shipping as our initial business model, at least for testing the market, et cetera, then how do we choose a marketplace that aligns well with the dropship model? Or how do we go it alone as a business owner if we're not doing drop shipping? So if we're effectively manufacturing locally and then shipping out to our customers, and would we consider an Amazon or an Etsy store versus a standalone e-commerce website? Again, this probably goes back to the ecosystem question, and most dropship suppliers already have connectors, or it's very easy to set up connectors between something like Shopify and those dropship suppliers. So if you are working, for example, with only a single dropship supplier, then you can usually set up a connector with that dropship supplier from Shopify. And that way, all of those orders automatically, instead of you having to download a CSV of orders and send those off to the suppliers, you want that to be as automated as possible. And this goes back to that net margin, because remember, your time comes out of your net margin. And if you're spending hours a day processing orders and getting those into the dropshipper's hands so that they can ship them out to the customer, and then you're spending more time getting the tracking details back from the dropshipper and then loading those manually into a marketplace, then obviously that's a huge amount of time as well. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to think of ways that we can automate as many parts of our operations as possible from day one. It may not be possible to do all of that from day one, but we always have to have automation in mind. And so if you can tap into an ecosystem like Shopify, the main drop shippers out there are very used to dealing with Shopify as a platform. And so they'll either have their own connector that is an app that can plug into your Shopify instance, or there are other connectors, third-party connectors in the App Store there that can connect to the major drop shipping providers around the world, particularly the on-demand, made-to-order T-shirts or mugs or things like that. There's 4 or 5 major global on-demand manufacturers of these types of goods, and the major dropship connector platforms will already have connectors between Shopify and these major dropship suppliers for you. And so it makes automating that initial process a lot easier. And so I think I'm all about how can we, as small business owners and people that are trying to test out new markets and new products, et cetera, how can we do that with the highest level of automation possible so that we're not making a rod for our own back as we scale?
You're speaking my language. I love automating things. So I like your answer.
Cool. And then you also raised a good question around e-commerce versus subscriptions. Have subscription services and business run their course? No, I don't think so. Mainly depending on the vertical and the product, right? So if you've got a consumable good, let's say you're a fast-moving consumer good product manufacturer or supplier, or you are selling makeup and you know that on a regular basis somebody's going to be running out of makeup, and so it makes sense for them to have a subscription of that going. Or you've got a skincare product, or you've got a food product, or you've got a supplement product. There's certain products, or you're selling dog food, or there's a lot of very specific niche products that very much lend themselves to subscriptions. Do I think subscriptions work well for every product, every vertical, every brand? Absolutely not. But for the right products, for the right brands, in the right verticals, absolutely. Getting someone into a subscription program, even incentivizing them to go into the program where, for example, you say, okay, if you're on subscription with us, you get free shipping. If you're not, then you don't. Or you have a pretty high free shipping threshold. Anybody that's on subscription gets shipping for free, or they get shipping for free if they're within a specific region or distance from where you're shipping from, or whatever. So there is subscriptions can definitely make consumers more sticky, and it can help ensure that they don't miss a replenishment timeline and then have to go and buy local because they ran out of dog food for Ruffy, and now they've got to go down to the local shop. And now, even if they restart buying through you, you've now missed one of those sales opportunities because they had to go down to the local corner store to get them through until they can get their shipment from you. So absolutely, I think subscriptions can be super popular, can be super successful, but it is so vertical and product specific that there's no one size fits all for subscriptions. No doubt about that.
Yeah, I've been seeing recently a lot more companies trying to force the idea of a subscription model, because obviously the reoccurring revenue is beautiful. People want it, companies want it, but I just see companies that it doesn't make sense and they're just trying to force it, and it's flopping, obviously. So I just didn't know if I was just looking at companies that were just trying to force it and it just didn't make sense, or if as a whole subscription businesses were petering out. So it makes sense though, in terms of products that are in high demand or that are getting reused and need to be repurchased on certain intervals, whether it's weekly or monthly. And obviously that makes sense. Yeah.
And if you're going to go into the subscription business, the initial e-commerce platform that you select is an even more important consideration at that point, because, for example, Shopify and BigCommerce don't out of the box offer subscriptions. And so therefore, you've got to use apps for that. And the user experience when using those apps for subscriptions is sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not so good. And managing that, and plus the fees for those apps can ratchet up pretty quickly. Whereas if you go with something like Squarespace and Squarespace Commerce out of the box offers subscriptions. It's native to the platform. And if you've got a Stripe account and you plug Stripe in, then automatically it will just trigger off the creation of the order inside Squarespace. It will automatically hit their saved card details in Stripe, automatically bill them, automatically create the order in Squarespace, and you're off to the races. So I think if you're going to be doing subscription, it has a lot of complexity associated with it, and you need to have the ability, or the end customer needs to have the ability to be able to pause, resume, skip. They need to be able to have the opportunity to aggregate multiple orders of multiple products into a single subscription date and frequency, for example. So subscriptions have a tremendous amount of complexity associated with them. So if you can have a platform that can help you manage that complexity out of the box, then all the better. If you don't, then it can become a very complex thing to manage. It can take a lot of time to manage as well.
For sure. Yeah, that's good to know about Squarespace. I actually didn't know that about Squarespace. I've only worked with Shopify and then integrations like Recharge, which have some pluses and minuses. So
exactly. So on those platforms, because they're SaaS platforms and their checkouts are locked down because they're SaaS, the subscription platforms are limited in the type of experience that they can create with those platforms. And usually it's not as seamless as a platform that offers it natively out of the box, or a custom experience that's built out on a BigCommerce or Shopify. So yeah, definitely something to bear in mind when you're first starting out and you're looking at introducing subscriptions. It's always better to work with a platform that offers it out of the box if you possibly can.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll have to look into Squarespace. That's interesting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to, before we're coming to the close of our time together, but anything else you wanted to cover off today, Ashley, before we finish up?
Nope. I think we hit all of the major talking points. So thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I love your questions. You come really prepared, and I do appreciate that. You've always got a really solid agenda planned, and we always have a great conversation. So I'm looking forward to the next one.
Me too. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. So I'm here again with Sean on one of our one-to-one mentorship calls, and he had some really good points of view and discussion and questions around where do we get to as founders when we know we need to produce content, we know we need to build personal brand, we know we need to own our brand, but other things can, as busy business owners, it's pretty easy to have content be crowded out of our daily routine. It's easy to have the busyness kind of overtake the ability to produce content at scale routinely particularly across multiple channels and platforms. And so I think this is something that many business owners struggle with, and it's not necessarily even the fact that they need to carve out time and make it a habit and a ritual, but it's also that some people simply aren't comfortable. Their personality, maybe they're an introvert. Not that I think you're an introvert, Sean, but there are some people that maybe are introverts or they've never put out content before, and so they're a little bit nervous about it. They're nervous about being judged. They're nervous about perhaps painting their business in a bad light because they're not eloquent enough or whatever they think. I've heard lots of excuses or lots of reasons as to why business leaders and business owners are uncomfortable making content a habit in their life and in their business process. And so I'd love to just chat a little bit more about that with you, because you had mentioned off air that you'd gotten into a pretty good rhythm there for a while, that you then got really busy, which is a great is a great problem to have. It overwhelmed you guys. You got back on top of things. And then because you got back out of the habit, you just hadn't got back to creating content. But let's maybe have a little bit of a discussion around that need, in my opinion, that really critical imperative for business leaders and owners and founders to have a really strong personal brand and presence, particularly on social, and specifically on LinkedIn, I believe is a huge opportunity still.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as I mentioned, I had built the habit and committed to daily posting maybe 3 months ago. Did it for roughly a month, saw some really good results. Didn't really set up a system or a framework around how to post, when to post. It was just notes on my Apple Notes. And then each morning I dedicated half an hour to draft the posts and publish them. That got down to 10 minutes towards the end. But I'd love to hear some tips on scaling it, creating a system, something bare bones that's just going to work to help me come up with the content and write it quickly. And also what forms of content you've found works for you, idea generation for content, and any tips around technology for publishing and scheduling as well would help.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, anything that reduces the excuses or the opportunity to make excuses to not create is a win. So I historically, I've spent a lot of money on some of the most expensive video production gear, wireless microphones, M3 mirrorless vlogging camera, some amazing technology to make creation, 3-axis gimbals and all sorts of other technology that makes content creation, or at least the quality of content creation, really high. But what I found is that I could often use that as an excuse to not create because I didn't have the right opportunity, or I didn't have the place to set it up, or it didn't look visually correct, or whatever the case may be. And so I just found, for me personally, I had to get, and particularly if you're making that much effort to create the content, then you have to put an equal amount of effort into post-production of that content to make you feel like you're getting the value out of the effort you put in to create it in the first place. And not only do you have the stumbling block of actually generating the content, but then you have the stumbling block of actually doing the post-production of the videos and the audio and everything else. And so for me, I had to strip it right back to its bare essentials. And so for me, that came down to writing every single day, long form posts on LinkedIn. And I'm a pretty good writer. And so that was always pretty easy for me. And that's something that I could easily commit to doing every single day. I could commit to banging that out every single day with high quality at scale. And the way that I found a lot of inspiration for the content pieces was Google Alerts, some select industry newsletters to make sure that I stayed on top of what was happening in the industry, that nothing major slipped through the cracks, that I could actually speak to, some news articles so that I could be a pundit commenting on the latest news and give me my own view and my own take on recent news. Obviously, every day in business, I encounter something new with clients, or I encounter a new experience, or I encounter something new in my personal life that oftentimes contributes to inspiration for a post. And then what I did from a video perspective, because I still love doing video, and I guess I'm confident enough and my personality is outgoing enough that I'm very, very confident from an audio perspective. I'm very confident from a video perspective. So I thought, how can I scale audio and how can I scale video? So when I came up with the podcast, I had to start in order to have a regular content production schedule, I had to think about ways, how can I create opportunities on a regular basis to create audio content? How can I create opportunities on a regular basis to create video content? And so the two ways that worked for me was, I had to create a pipeline of interviews for the podcast that gave me an opportunity to get myself into an environment where I could do the Q&A with people knowledgeable on topics related to the niche that I'm interested in and that I'm building an audience around. And then I also thought, how can I take some of the conversations I'm having, and this was obviously only recently, how can I take some of the conversations I'm having with people around mentorship and giving them ideas and just having these one-off conversations? How can I create a process whereby I can more systematize that and make it more consistent? And that's when the concept of creating a more formalized mentorship program came about. It's, hey, I can actually help more people at scale and put myself in a position where I'm creating regular opportunities to create content. So it felt like a massive win-win there, and I could put out that content on a very regular basis to the podcast and expand from one episode to two per week. And then when it came to video, I was like, okay, how can I create an opportunity to create video content on a regular basis? Okay, what do I do almost every single day? That would be a great chance and an opportunity to create video at the same time. Oh, I walk my dog usually at least twice a day. If the weather, unless it's absolutely hosing down, I usually walk my dog twice a day on our property here that we live on. And out rural, it's in the bush, it's a beautiful sort of environment. Sure, the production quality is not going to necessarily be as good as if I was sitting in front of a camera with a wireless mic in an office or in a soundproof room, but it's good. It's an engaging environment. And more importantly, it's an environment I enjoy creating in. So I was like, cool, I could just take my phone. My phone camera is so bloody good. I can put it into selfie mode. I can talk to the camera. I can shout out my thoughts. I can cut that down to something really engaging under a minute that is suitable for the likes of TikTok and Instagram Reels. And I can also repurpose some of these videos to LinkedIn to go with a long form post. And I can do all the post-production inside of 15 minutes in TikTok and then export it out of TikTok with the background music and be ready to rock on other format and in other places, including YouTube Shorts. And so I thought, okay, this is something that, because I'm doing it anyway, this is automatically sustainable. And it's an environment that I feel really comfortable creating in. And the quality is, from my perspective, sure, it's not studio quality, but it's good enough. The audio is good enough. The video is good enough. It's good enough. And so I think that if I had a gun to my head and I had to choose between quantity and quality, I would choose quant every single day. But I'm trying to, as a process of getting better and as a process of practicing and as a process of systematizing my content production and distribution process, as a standard of trying to get better with that and trying to use better tools and use better, more rapid post-production tools, so like Descript for the audio and things like that, right? So I've introduced tools, but the first thing I had to do was create regular and routine opportunities to create great content. And once I did that, then I can systematize, add processes, add technology to make that and streamline the distribution and editing process. But it really just came down to finding opportunities in my life to create content almost every single day.
Is that scheduled in, a time block every single day at the same
not
time?
Not necessarily. Usually my written posts are generated first thing in the morning because that's usually when I'm going through the news of the day. So more often than not, it's early morning when I'm going through the news, and then something will spring to mind and I'll produce it. Otherwise, if I've got meetings in the morning and it displaces that, then it'll be later in the day. And then from a video perspective, I try to dodge any rain. Like it's raining right now, so I probably won't go walking until a bit later today, and assuming it clears up. And so I'll do a video while I'm out. And then what I'll probably do, because I haven't done a written post yet for LinkedIn today, I'll probably use that video as my long form. I'll upload the video along with my long form post for the day, because I didn't get a chance to post this morning because I had meetings all this morning. I'm a little bit flexible, but I have some sort of predetermined times when I usually like to post. But more importantly for me, it's just about seeking out those opportunities throughout my day to create great content and be inspired to create great content.
Yeah, nice. Love it. Do you have any contractors or people that assist you with post-production or are a part of the process at all?
No, I do it all myself as of today. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted to do that was because I wanted to get my system nailed down. Now that I've got a pretty solid system of post-production for all my content, it is something that I could probably now outsource, because I could give direction. I could put a 10-step process together with really clear instructions to somebody on Fiverr or Upwork or something like that could help me with post-production, and it could probably allow me to scale a bit further. But at the moment, I'm getting joy out of doing the post-production. I actually enjoy it. I enjoy the process of selecting the clips and I enjoy doing the work. And so as long as I continue to enjoy the work and I have time to do the work, I'll continue doing it. But basically at the point where I can no longer run an effective business and put out content and do the post-production, then I'll start outsourcing parts of that, no question. And it'll probably be the podcast that gets out, post-production that gets outsourced first, because that's a pretty relatively easy thing to outsource. I say relatively easy, but particularly for the Mentoring Moments episodes, it's a little bit subjective of the clips that I think will resonate the most with my audience. And so there is a little bit of cherry picking that I do on that. Yeah, that will be a little bit harder to outsource, but yeah, look, it'll happen eventually. In fact, it'll have to happen because I want to significantly scale up the volume of content that I'm putting out. And at that point, I won't be able to do it all myself. It'd just be impossible. I can generate the raw content easily enough, but in order to be able to do post-production at scale and distribution at scale, that's going to become harder.
Yeah. Absolutely. What attributes have you seen that correlate with high engagement on your posts? Is there a specific structure or idea or level of polarization that you've seen is common with posts that do really well?
Unfortunately not. If there was, I would probably replicate that.
Sure.
There are people that sell courses and tips and tricks for LinkedIn and, how to guarantee engagement and all that sort of stuff. For me, what I've found is that the posts that I think will do the best don't, and the posts that I think won't do the best do. It's very rare. Very occasionally, I'll think, man, this is a bombing post. This is one of my best bangers ever, and it'll do really well. But that's the exception rather than the rule. Oftentimes, the posts that I put the most time into don't do the best. The posts that I bang out in 5 minutes off the top of my head rock. Yeah, I think it's a combination of the algo, where people are at in their life, who happens to see it, because that initial cohort of distribution that LinkedIn determines, I think that matters. I think time of the day matters. All those things are variables that are really difficult to perfectly account for at all times. And yeah, I just think you just have to keep pumping it out, because some of the posts that I put the least amount of time into ended up being my most high posts that have 50,000, 100,000 views are posts that in some instances I literally spent 5 minutes on. Like, the value of the content I still think was there, because I always try to never just mail it in. So I always try to make sure that the concepts are really key and are hopefully super valuable, regardless of the detail of the post. I want to make sure that the concept in the post is super valuable. So I never try to just mail it in. Yeah, you can just never really predict exactly how a post is going to do. I don't think. There are people that claim that they can guarantee a certain level of engagement with every single post, and good for them. But for me, it hasn't proven to be the case.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Justin Welsh is someone that he says that with his program, he can pretty much guarantee that every single post will get high engagement. And going by his posts and the level of engagement he gets on his posts, maybe he's right. Maybe he can figure out a way to game the system in a way that is consistent in nature. But for me, I just haven't found it yet.
Yeah. I think when you're posting about how to get engagement on posts, those posts are just going to do well because everyone wants to know that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he's been able to scale so quickly, is because it's probably the number one topic people want to figure out is how to get more engagement on their posts. But when it's a more niche subject, like what we do, where not everyone on LinkedIn is interested in reading it, you really have to just be consistent. And then one nugget out of that is going to resonate with maybe someone who has a bigger profile, and when they engage with it, it's going to blow up in their network and so on.
Yeah, definitely. That's absolutely been the case for me. And sometimes we know that comments are the highest form of engagement, then likes, and then shares. But what I've found is that if someone shares, instead of just sharing the post, if they comment with their share and then you respond in a comment to their shared post with their commentary, then that really boosts the post quite substantially. LinkedIn has actually removed recently, I don't know exactly when the date happened, but it was fairly recent, that when someone reposts without commenting with the repost, you can't comment on their repost, because all it does is redirect you back to your original post. There is no place you'd be commenting on your original post. So LinkedIn has made two types of sharing models now, where when you go to share, you actually have to select, whether I can't remember exactly what the verbiage is they have, but something along the lines of, do you want to comment, do you not, or do you just want to share? And it gives you two options now. And the share with a comment option is the more powerful option, but it's definitely, in terms of ranking order, comment, like, share, in terms of impact on your post's reach. That's order that I've seen, and it's been very consistent for multiple years. Yeah, I think that if you can get one or two really solid people with a big following engaging with your post, liking and commenting, that's usually when a post will just go insane.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other thing is, watch out for bugs on LinkedIn. So they've got a really nasty bug that is regularly recurring, and I noticed it's active now. It will limit you. It will either, when you post, it will either say comments turned off by default to where no one can comment on the post, or it will say that only your connections can post on your post, can only comment on your post. And that's a really nasty recurring bug that you don't know because it's not something you think to check. You think that by default, anyone can comment, which is the norm, which is how it's supposed to be. But occasionally this bug keeps recurring where it limits who can comment on your post. And effectively, that's limiting who can engage on your post. So it's a nasty bug. And I always, now I've got it as part of my posting process, I immediately click the three dots and click on who can comment on my post. And I just make sure that it's everyone, because that bug will absolutely kill your reach if they either have comments turned off or only your connections can comment.
Yeah, that's a good flag. Nice.
Cool. Anything else about content that you want to have a yarn about?
How about storing and collating ideas that you've got? What's your system for that?
I don't. I know a lot of people do, and it works really well for them. I don't, because I find that a lot of that stuff can lose relevancy pretty quick, particularly if it's news or it's industry related stuff. Our industry moves so fast, and you'll know this because your side of the industry moves super fast too. I find that our industry is so fast moving that unless you're commenting on something that like has happened either the same day or the day before, even certain concepts change so fast and algorithms change so fast and design patterns can change so fast in our industry that I'm trying to stay current myself. And so therefore I try to make sure that my content stays current based on me staying current in my own industry. And I've often told people that if I took 6 months off and let's say I took a 6-month sabbatical from my business, I would have missed out on so much in that time that I would probably have to spend a month getting current again when I got back before I could really start creating content at scale again and being super useful to my clients again, because our industry does move super fast. So there are certain things that are evergreen and certain concepts and topics that are absolutely evergreen. And that probably relates back to one of my pillars of content, which is B2B e-com. And I think that is absolutely going to explode over the next decade. I think it's going to far outstrip the growth in B2C e-commerce and even D2C e-commerce, just because they started from so far behind, right? And they're not as mature. B2B is not nearly as mature as B2C is from an e-commerce perspective today. So they got a lot of catching up to do over the next decade, combined with the B2B market is so much bigger from a revenue perspective than the B2C market. Anyways, latest estimates are about 6 times as big. So by definition, the market is automatically much larger. And so I think the opportunities there are massive. And so I will oftentimes speak to that as a pillar of my content. So that is something that's pretty evergreen that I can plan a little bit in advance. But as far as most other topics, I just can't.
That's such a great point, because I had a idea collation system, and often the days which I couldn't come up with content and I would be staring at these ideas, I would be thinking all of this stuff is old news, these tips, this commentary on the specific topic or this article or this acquisition or this new feature. People are not going to want to hear this. So having an approach that says, I'm going to comment on things that are either out today or the day before and be recent and frequent, I think gives you the confidence that this is content that people are going to care about as well.
And remember, the other thing that's good about that approach is that it's content that people sometimes are searching for. For example, what I found is when I put up a YouTube short, because YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world after Google, what I found is that sometimes when I post really super relevant content based on a news piece that is the same day or a day old, people are actually searching for that piece of information in YouTube. And I can have posts just by definition blow up because people are already searching for content around that topic at that time.
Yeah, okay.
They don't do that as much, obviously, on LinkedIn. They don't go to LinkedIn and pump in a topic. That's not normally where people don't usually use LinkedIn as a search engine, but they definitely do. They definitely do on YouTube, and they definitely do on TikTok as well.
Yeah, I look at LinkedIn to get a snapshot of the news. I follow a lot of influencers who are going to share articles or if company pages like Forbes, TechCrunch. I prefer that over the Facebook feed because the quality of the content's a little higher. So I think it is turning into like a mini news publication platform similar to Twitter, where people are resharing content because they're seeing what's doing well, and it's going to be content that's recent and important. So I think, yeah, LinkedIn's probably going through a similar transition to what Facebook did 5 to 10 years ago, with people seeing the opportunity to get engagement there for things other than personal content.
Totally agree. Couldn't agree more. Awesome, mate. Look, this was a fantastic content discussion, and I think it's going to be super helpful to lots of other people. So thanks for the awesome question.
You're very welcome, Jason. My pleasure.
If you'd like to register for free for the Mentor Sessions with Jason Greenwood, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason. See you there.